So, for my local marine community profile project, I chose to focus on this rocky intertidal community located at Little Corona del Mar Beach in Newport Beach. This is a relatively small area that has a combination of both sandy and rocky beach zones, but I'm going to specifically be focusing on the rocky zone shown in these videos. This is a really cool community with a lot of really unique rock formations, as you can see, and has a lot of productivity and life in it. So as a rocky intertidal community, there's a lot of physical and biological factors that have a large impact on what kind of adaptations the organisms here need to have. In terms of physical adaptations, this is more prevalent in higher and mid-intertidal zones, where the organisms are going to be out of the water for longer periods of time during low tide. An example of this would be having to deal with desiccation or drying out. In this case, organisms can keep water preserved in their shells or can hide under rocks to avoid overheating in the sun, or can curl up inwards like sea anemones to also avoid drying out. Additionally, wave energy can have a big effect. As you can see, the waves here are very strong, as you can see by me almost getting knocked over by one. And animals also have to deal with not being washed away. Animals like mussels have the abyssal threads that allow them to stay attached onto rocks, and algae or types of surf grass will be better at bending over and have lower surface area in order to avoid being ripped up by the waves. Biological factors are more prevalent in the lower intertidal zones, where there's a larger amount of competition for food and space. You can see this by sea anemones fighting with each other for space, or with how mussel beds cannot live too low in intertidal zones because they will be eaten by starfish. Speaking of mussels, they are also one of the most common organisms that are found at this intertidal community. Along with them, another ecologically significant organism are various types of algae, both micro and macro, that provide sources of food, shelter, and sources of oxygen as a result of photosynthesis. Looking at some specific organisms, first we have the sunburst anemone from the Cnidarian phylum. This animal is a filter feeder that catches food floating by with its tentacles. Some of its adaptations include the ability to fold its tentacles into its body to prevent desiccation during low tide, the nematocysts on its tentacles that all cnidarians have, and the photosynthetic zooxanthellae that live in its tissues, which provide food for the anemone. Different types of anemones are known to compete with each other for space in intertidal zones and can move away from each other if they have to. And this is one of the most common animals that I saw at this beach. The next organism that I am looking at is the mossy chiton, which is a member of the mollusk phylum. This animal eats algae off of the surface of rocks, and some of its general characteristics and adaptations include the radula that it has to scrape the algae off of these rocks, and also its hard shell, which covers its muscular foot. This shell acts as a way to both prevent it from desiccation and to keep it from being ripped off of the rocks by high wave energy. The third organism that I am looking at is the hermit crab, which is a member of the arthropod phylum. This animal crawls around on the rocks and grabs any small invertebrate, fish, or worm that it can find and eats it. Some of their adaptations include the most obvious, which is using shells found from different types of mollusks, and wearing them on their backs in order to protect the softer parts of their body. Additionally, because they can move around, they can hide under rocks and into shady areas in order to avoid the heat from the sun during low tide. They can be seen interacting with each other a lot as they move around a lot more than the other organisms that I've looked at, and have even been known to fight with each other over shells if they're around a similar size. And again, these animals are very abundant, as you can see in these videos, and probably after mussels and barnacles were the most common species that I saw. And finally, the fourth organism that I am looking at is the opali fish, which is a member of the chordate phylum. These tiny fish swim around the small tide pools and eat algae and sometimes small invertebrates. As you can tell, these are very small fish that have a little tiny white dot on the top, and eventually when they get larger will venture out into the open ocean. But by living in tide pools, they can avoid larger predators that would easily be able to eat them in lower intertidal zones or in just the ocean at large. So this intertidal community faces a variety of different environmental challenges, both natural and man-made. Talking about the natural challenges includes high wave energy, which can knock organisms over, and overall how harsh it is to live in tide pools in general, because oxygen levels are low as they're left out of water for long periods of time, as well as a rapidly decreasing pH and increased temperatures. However, it is the man-made challenges that we need to focus on the most because they are the things that we can take actions to stop. Two of the most important of these challenges are pollution caused by people leaving trash behind after visiting the beach, and people taking animals and shells out of their natural environments. This is such a big issue because any species being taken out of its environment can lead to entire ecosystems collapsing. Even shells shouldn't be taken out because hermit crabs need them to survive. And also they may not be as empty as people think they are because the initial animals that made the shells may still be living in them. Luckily, there are efforts being made to prevent these issues from destroying this entire habitat. The City of Newport Beach and California Water Boards are both organizations that are working to protect this area. They have signs posted around the beach telling people not to take anything home with them, as it is a marine protected area, and signs educating people about life in the tide pools so that the people will care about protecting them.